Inside this single state, there's a rainforest that gets 140 inches of rain a year and a desert that gets 8. They sit barely 100 miles apart. But the strange part isn't the weather. It's that one mountain range has split Washington into two populations that vote opposite, farm opposite, talk opposite, and pay taxes opposite. And the state government has spent nearly a century pretending the divide doesn't exist. Look at Washington from a satellite on a clear day and you'll see it instantly. The western third of the state is soaked, deep green, and packed with people. The eastern two-thirds is brown, dry, and almost empty. A single ridgeline of snow runs down the middle like a scar. That ridgeline isn't just scenery. It's the reason Washington behaves less like one state and more like two countries forced to share a border. Two economies, two political identities, two completely different ways of life, pinned together by a mountain range that decides who gets water and who doesn't. To understand how one mountain range broke a state in half, you have to start with what the Pacific Ocean does when it hits a wall. The Cascades aren't just mountains, they're a moisture guillotine. Pacific air rolls in off the ocean carrying enormous loads of water vapor, and when it slams into the western slopes of the Cascades, it has nowhere to go but up. As it climbs, it cools. As it cools, it dumps. The Olympic Peninsula and the Western Cascades catch up to 140 inches of rain a year in some spots, more than almost anywhere in the continental United States. Moss hangs from the trees like curtains. Ferns grow chest high. Entire forests sit in permanent twilight under a green canopy so thick it muffles sound. Then the air crosses the crest of the mountains and everything changes. By the time it spills down the eastern slopes, it has nothing left to give. It arrives as a dry husk. 40 miles east of Seattle, annual rainfall collapses to under 10 inches a year. That's desert territory, drier than parts of Texas, drier than parts of New Mexico. Same state, same latitude, same afternoon's drive. You can stand in a temperate rainforest in the morning and a sagebrush step by sunset, and you never have to leave Washington to do it. That rain shadow didn't just change the weather. It decided who could live where and how and for how long. Roughly 75% of Washington's 7.9 million people live west of the Cascade Crest. Most of them are crammed into a single corridor along Puget Sound, stretching from Olympia in the south up through Tacoma, Seattle, and Everett to Bellingham near the Canadian border. It's a thin strip of coastal lowland hemmed in by water on one side and mountains on the other, and it holds the overwhelming majority of the state's people, jobs, and money. The eastern two-thirds of Washington, an area larger than several entire U.S. states, holds barely a quarter of the population. Spokane is the only real city out there, and here's a detail that tells you everything. Spokane is closer to the capital of Idaho than it is to its own state capital in Olympia. Drive the back roads of eastern Washington and you can go an hour without seeing a stoplight. Wheat fields roll to the horizon, irrigation pivots trace huge green circles in the dirt. Small farm towns appear and disappear in the rearview mirror. But the people who do live out there aren't poor, and they aren't marginal. They feed the country. And that's where the second twist comes in. If you enjoy the way geography quietly decides who Americans become, go ahead and subscribe. That's all this channel does. Eastern Washington, the dry, empty side, grows roughly 60 to 70% of all the apples eaten in the United States. Not a plurality, a supermajority. If you bit into an apple this week, the odds are overwhelming that it came from a desert in a state most Americans associate with rain. That's not an accident, and it's not luck. It's the result of one of the most ambitious engineering projects in American history. In 1933, construction began on Grand Coulee Dam, a monster of concrete and steel that took nearly a decade to finish. When it was completed in 1942, it was the largest hydroelectric facility on Earth. It tamed the Columbia River and turned a sagebrush desert into a federally irrigated paradise, the Columbia Basin Project. Pumps lifted river water hundreds of feet up onto the dry plateau, canals carried it for miles, and suddenly, the same ground that had grown nothing but tumbleweeds was producing apples, cherries, hops, wine grapes, and pears at a scale no one had ever seen. Towns like Wenatchee and Yakima became the orchard capitals of the world. Today they ship fruit to more than 60 countries, but that same dam did something else. The cheap, almost limitless electricity it produced powered the aluminum smelters that built American bombers in World War II. After the war, that same cheap power lured Boeing's expansion, and decades later, it helped attract Microsoft, Amazon, and the entire tech corridor that now defines the Seattle skyline. One dam, two completely different economies. Both sides of the state depend on it, and neither side wants to admit how much it owes the other. So if both halves of Washington are this successful, why do they hate each other? The locals already have a name for the divide. They call it the Cascade Curtain, and once you start looking for it, you see it everywhere. West of the Curtain, Seattle, Tacoma, Olympia, Bellingham, Washington votes among the bluest in America. The economy runs on tech, aerospace, coffee chains, biotech, and global trade. The culture leans cosmopolitan, environmentalist, and progressive. Honestly, large parts of Western Washington feel less like the rest of the United States and more like Vancouver, British Columbia, sitting just up the coast. East of the Curtain, it's a different country. Spokane, Yakima, the Tri-Cities, Walla Walla, these places vote deep red year after year by huge margins. The economy runs on wheat, cattle, orchards, hops, and irrigated row crops. The culture is Mountain West conservative. Pickup trucks, gun racks, county fairs, rodeo weekends. People wear cowboy hats without irony. In every statewide election, the western side outvotes the eastern side so reliably that it doesn't matter how the east votes. The West decides everything: governor, senators, ballot measures, all of it. Eastern counties have noticed. They've noticed for a long time. And they have, repeatedly and seriously, tried to leave. Bills have been filed in the state legislature to allow Eastern Washington to break away and form a 51st state. Some proposals have called it Liberty. Others have proposed merging Eastern Washington with the Idaho Panhandle, which is culturally almost identical. These aren't joke campaigns by fringe candidates. Real legislators file real bills. They get hearings. They get news coverage. They never pass, but they never stop coming either. And that's strange enough on its own. But what makes Washington genuinely unique isn't just the political divide, it's that the state government baked the contradiction directly into its tax code. Washington is one of only a handful of US states with no personal income tax. Most people assume that's a libertarian principle, a small government, low tax kind of state by design. It isn't. The real story is much weirder. In 1933, in the worst depths of the Great Depression, Washington voters overwhelmingly passed an income tax. They wanted to tax the wealthy, save struggling family farms, and fund public services that were collapsing under the weight of mass unemployment. It was a populist, progressive measure, and it won by a landslide. Then the state Supreme Court struck it down on a technicality, and every single attempt to bring it back, for nearly a century now, has been blocked, either in court or at the ballot box. The result is one of the most regressive tax systems in the entire country. Because Washington has no income tax, it funds itself mainly through sales taxes and property taxes. And sales taxes hit poor people much harder than rich people. Because poor people spend a larger share of their income on basic goods. Studies have shown that the poorest residents of Washington pay roughly 6 times the share of their income in state and local taxes that the wealthiest residents do. 6 times. Think about that contradiction for a second. The progressive West, Seattle, with its tech wealth and its environmental laws and its activist city council, built and maintains a tax system that punishes its own stated values. Why? Because the conservative East blocks every reform that would replace it. Any income tax proposal needs to win statewide, and statewide means crossing the curtain. The East has no interest in raising taxes on anyone. And so the system stays frozen exactly where it landed in the 1930s. The divide isn't just cultural anymore. It's locked into the law itself. And once you see all that, The rest of Washington starts looking like a collage of things that shouldn't exist in the same place. The Hoh Rainforest on the Olympic Peninsula is a true temperate rainforest sitting at roughly the same latitude as Maine. Trees grow 300 feet tall. Mosses cover every surface. It rains more than 12 feet a year in some spots. Not inches, feet. A few hundred miles east, you have the channeled scablands, a desert moonscape of bare basalt cliffs, dry waterfalls, and gouged-out canyons. Geologists figured out that this entire landscape was carved in a matter of days, not millennia, days, when an enormous prehistoric ice dam burst at the end of the last ice age and released a glacial lake the size of Lake Erie all at once. The flood ripped across eastern Washington at freight train speed and reshaped the land in a single catastrophic week. In the middle of the apple country sits Hanford, the most contaminated nuclear site in the Western Hemisphere. The plutonium for the Nagasaki bomb was produced there in secret during World War II, on a desert reservation chosen because it was empty, dry, and conveniently close to the cheap power of Grand Coulee Dam. Cleanup is expected to take decades and cost more than $300 billion. Apple orchards grow within sight of the reactors. And then there's Forks, a tiny logging town on the wet side of the peninsula that became globally famous because a Mormon novelist in Arizona needed somewhere it always rained for her vampire books. Tourists still show up looking for Bella and Edward. Each one of these places is a reminder that this isn't really one state. It's a collage of unrelated worlds stitched together by an arbitrary border. And once you see the collage, the secession bills start to sound a lot less crazy. So why hasn't Washington split? Why hasn't the East actually broken away? The answer is the same dam, the same river, and the same mountains that created the divide in the first place. The Columbia River starts up in Canada, flows south into eastern Washington, cuts straight through the dry side, gets harnessed at Grand Coulee, irrigates the apple country, generates the electricity that powers Seattle, and finally empties past Portland into the Pacific Ocean. It is the single circulatory system that keeps both halves of the state alive. The Cascades catch the rain that fills the river that feeds the dam that lights the city. The dry east grows the food. The wet west sells it to the world. The east has the water source. The west has the ports, the airports, the factories, the buyers. Neither half functions without the other. Try to separate them, and both sides starve in different ways. One for cash, the other for power. Washington doesn't hold together because of culture or shared identity or political agreement. It holds together because of one hydrological loop that neither side can leave. But that loop is starting to fray. Climate models show the Cascade snowpack shrinking fast. And the snowpack isn't just snow, it's the giant frozen battery that the entire state runs on. All winter, snow piles up high in the mountains. All spring and summer, it melts slowly and feeds the rivers that fill the reservoirs that turn the turbines that power the cities and water the orchards. Less snow means less summer river flow. Less river flow means less hydropower, less irrigation water, fewer apples, hotter cities, drier forests, and bigger wildfires on the eastern side. The east is already burning more each year. Smoke seasons get longer. Whole towns have been evacuated. The west is already rationing water in late summer and watching salmon runs collapse in rivers that used to run cold and full year-round. The divide that geography created is being sharpened by a climate that's slowly erasing the one thing holding both sides together. The question isn't whether Washington is divided anymore. The question is whether the glue lasts long enough to matter. Pull back to that satellite image one more time. Green on the left, brown on the right. One thin white line of snow running down the middle, slowly thinning year by year. Every state in America has internal divides. Tennessee admits to 3 regions and put 3 stars on its flag. Pennsylvania has its old east-west split between Philadelphia and Pittsburgh. Colorado has its continental divide. California has its north-south rivalry. These divides are everywhere, but most states paper over them with a single shared identity, a single story they tell about themselves. Washington can't. The split is too total. The wet half and the dry half don't share weather, don't share crops, don't share politics, don't share culture, and don't even share a tax logic that makes sense to either of them. And yet neither half can survive without the other. That's what makes Washington the opposite of every other state in America. Not that it's divided, everywhere is divided. What makes Washington different is that the divide isn't a flaw in the design. The divide is the design. One mountain range, one river, one dam, and two completely incompatible worlds locked together by a geography that refuses to let either one go. If you want to see how a similar invisible line broke another state in half, check out the videos on screen now, and if you haven't yet, subscribe. There's a lot more land left to explain,